again, Iraq is in complete turmoil. This time, it all centers on a group called the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, commonly referred to as ISIS. Now, you'd have to be a scholar on Iraq and Syria to fully understand this conflict, so we can't explain everything. But we can tell you enough to contextualize all of the news stories you've been hearing lately. So the next time someone says ISIS, you can say, oh yeah, I know those guys. They're horrible terrorists. So who is ISIS and what do they want? Well, they're a jihadist militant group with strongholds in both Iraq and Syria, as you can see on this map. But they're not stopping there. Their goal is to obtain more land so they can create their own nation. Their dream country would look something like this, and it would be called the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. So who are the fighting members of ISIS? Well, that's where it gets complicated. Iraq breaks down into three major groups: Sunni Arabs, Shiite Arabs, and Kurds. ISIS members are Sunni Arabs, as was Saddam Hussein. His regime was Sunni-backed. So does that mean this is just the old guard taking back power? No. Saddam Hussein was a secularist. ISIS, on the other hand, is a militant jihadist group that wants strict Sharia law. This was not the desire of Hussein's regime, although there are signs that some of Saddam's former forces are currently working with ISIS. It's complicated, and in Syria, it gets even more complicated. Syria's war crime committing government is currently fighting a civil war against various rebel groups. ISIS is not one of those rebel groups, but ISIS does want to take over most of Syria, so they are in some degree of armed conflict with both the Syrian government and the rebels. It's pure chaos. In short, ISIS has been committing acts of violence and terrorism in both Syria and Iraq for a while, and they're only now making the news for one simple reason: they're winning. Militarily speaking, ISIS is the most successful jihadist group the world has ever seen. They're collecting taxes from businesses, setting up infrastructure, and releasing quarterly reports. They're gaining strength, so they could be around for a long time, and they may be a bigger threat to the surrounding areas in the long run than Al-Qaeda.
The real-life situation I will be exploring is ISIS and their growing presence around the world. The presence of ISIS throughout the world right now leads me to ask this question: can one small group be a threat to the entire world? I believe so. I believe one small group can very well pose a great threat to the entire world. ISIS has been in existence since 1999. They joined forces with the group Al-Qaeda in 2004. From 2004 to 2014, the year they separated from Al-Qaeda, they stayed out of the global spotlight. After separating from Al-Qaeda, they started doing things that caught the media's attention, especially in the West. In 2014, a total of 9 attacks were linked to ISIS that occurred around the world. The countries these attacks occurred in were Belgium with 1 attack, Australia with 3 attacks, France with 3 attacks, and Canada with 2 attacks. The year 2015 had an increased amount of ISIS-linked events with a total of 25, nearly triple that of 2014. 1 occurred in Saudi Arabia, 6 occurred in France, including the popularized November shootings and suicide bombings. 1 attack occurred in Belgium, 1 attack occurred in Libya, 1 attack occurred in Denmark, 3 attacks occurred in Tunisia, 1 attack occurred in Yemen, 2 attacks occurred in the United States, including the recent December San Bernardino shooting. 3 attacks occurred in Turkey, 1 attack occurred in Kuwait, 3 attacks involved Egypt, 1 attack involved Iraq, 2 attacks involved Turkey, and 1 attack involved Lebanon. All of these attacks that were based around the world are hardcore evidence that a small group like ISIS can be a threat to the entire world. The reasoning for ISIS committing these crimes against countries around the globe is to create a unified Muslim territory in order to enforce extremist beliefs.
Go over to NBC's chief global correspondent, Bill Neely. He's at the soccer stadium where the first explosions were felt and what we now know were coordinated attacks. Bill, good morning. What's the situation there?
Good morning, Savannah. I mean, this is one of the modern symbols of France, a carefully chosen target, the National Soccer Stadium, where at least two suicide bombers blew themselves up just yards from where I am at Gate J. 80,000 people were inside this stadium last night when at 19 minutes and 32 seconds into the game there was an explosion. Very distinct, you can hear it on the audio. The commentator thought it was firecrackers. It was heard by millions of people watching the game on television around France, and it was heard inside the stadium. There it is by the French President Francois Hollande. He was hastily evacuated from the stadium as two more explosions rang out. The exact casualty figure still a little unclear. One civilian definitely dead, three others dead. They may be the suicide bombers, still unclear, and around 50 people injured, some of them seriously. The game remarkably continued. The fans most of them didn't realize what had happened. After the game, they weren't allowed to leave. They spilled out onto the pitch. When they were allowed to leave, they left, some of them singing the French national anthem, the Marseillaise. The players didn't know what had happened. One of them, a French player, his sister was inside the concert hall that was attacked. He only learned that after the game. She fled for her life. The German players were stuck here for 12 hours after the game. Some unanswered questions, Matt and Savannah. You know, why did the suicide bombers strike when they did, not earlier when 80,000 people were getting into this stadium? Did they make any attempt to target the President of France? Clearly this was a high-profile game. After leaving here, as we know, the French president went to the scene of the deadliest attack where he vowed revenge. He said ISIS was responsible, a jihadist terrorist group, and he said France had to be pitiless, merciless, a country with cold blood. But he said France will triumph. As you say, this is the worst attack in France since World War II. So much more deadly than those terrible attacks on the Jewish supermarket in Charlie Hebdo, which I covered back in January. And it's the first time we've seen suicide bombers on French soil.
Members of countries that have been targeted by ISIS have defected from their countries, like France and the United States, to join ISIS. The question I want to leave you with is, are the victims truly victims if their members join the side of the apparent enemy, and is that enemy truly bad?